I just found it on the plugin's website, so you can copy and paste it. But this stuff is what we're telling it to put inside that div. So I have an empty div called pager, which lives down here, which is what I'm telling it. I'm saying I want those numbers to live in the thing called with an ID of pager. That's what this line says. And then this, I'm saying I want you to build something specific that lives in that div. So what it's doing is for every image in the slideshow, it's creating a list item. It's creating a link that goes nowhere because you don't want to actually leave the page. You just want to be able to click on something. And then it's creating an image that lives in that link. So I'm telling it to put that image into that link. And I'm telling it to make that image 90 pixels wide. And then in my CSS, I think, this is from last year, I am then saying the height and the width of this list item. So this is saying find the pager. Any list item in that pager should display as block. It should float left. It should be styled. Shouldn't have bullets next to it, and it should be 45 by 45. So what we've done here is, if we go back and fix this. What I told it was I wanted it to put an image in that list item that was 90 pixels wide, right? But then in CSS, I made the list item 45 by 45. So it's cropping all of these images, so they're square. Versus if I were to tell it to be a 45 pixel wide image, we should get little rectangles. And now these are actually proportional. So it's just a matter of you having to figure out what it is you want, and then you tell the plugin how wide the image should be, and then you use CSS to make it all look the way you want. So the reason we're looking at cycle is because of its stripped down nature. Some plugins that you'll find, you'll use a plugin and you'll get all the images, you'll get all this stuff, you'll get goofiness, because developers are not designers. So generally, if you find a plugin that works the way you want it to work, it's going to be pretty ugly. So cycle is nice because it offers us the functionality we want, and then we just use CSS to make things look the way we want them to look. So before I get into that stuff, let's talk about how this actually works, right? So if we look at this page, we'll go back to having this be simple. We'll say, so we're going to go back to having a page that just has a slideshow on it, right? So all we're doing is we loaded the plugin, we found the plugin we want, cycle, and we're using it to create the slideshow. So just like you've been doing, not in the head of a document, hopefully, you use Google to load up the jQuery library like you've been doing, right? Because without the jQuery library, a jQuery plugin will not work. So whenever you use any plugin, you still have to load the jQuery library. You then have to load the plugin, which is on line 12. And then you have to tell the browser to use the plugin. So just because you've loaded the plugin doesn't mean that the slideshow is going to magically appear. You then have to tell the plugin what to work on, which is this guy here. It's us telling Cycle to make a Cycle slideshow of the div called gallery. Okay? So this file is a file that I've downloaded. So whatever plugin you find, you go to the plugin's website, and there's always a download button somewhere. So when you download a plugin, sometimes they'll let you download a JavaScript file. Just like we looked at jQuery as a library, you can download it as a jQuery.js file. All these plugins, some of them let you download the file easily. Others, you will click on the plugin and you will get all of this. And you will say, what is going on? Why am I looking at this? This is all the code that makes the plugin work. So you're actually looking at the file. So if you click on a link and you get all this stuff, check your URL, and you're probably looking at the file. You can just copy it all, because JavaScript is just text. So you could copy the whole thing. You could go into a folder called JS. You could make a new file, call it my new cycle.js. The name of the file doesn't matter. What matters is that you tell the browser what file to find. So I would just paste in all my code, and now I have a huge JavaScript file, and I save that, and now I have it in my JS folder. So right now I'm telling it to use jQuery.cycle.all.min that lives in the JS folder, which is this file, which should be the same exact thing as this file. So I could just change the location of that file to my new cycle.js. And in theory, if I mess this up, this will still work. This one will still work. Let's see. Yeah, okay? So we're just using a different file. So when you look at plugins like this, this is the entire plugin. This is all the code that makes it work. You've just downloaded it. You've loaded up Google library, the jQuery library from Google. Then you have to load the plugin. If you put the plugin before jQuery, the plugin uses the $sign all over the place, and nothing will work because it doesn't understand what the $sign means. So load the jQuery library first, then the plugin, then tell the plugin what to do. Okay? Those are the 3 steps.
Is there any advantage of putting the plugin into your own folder?
A lot of yes and no. That's the way we always have done it in the past, is you have JavaScript, it lives on your server, it lives in your folder, your website references your folder. A lot of plugins that you'll find, the author doesn't want you just linking to their website, because every time somebody visits your page, it would reference their website and grab the file from them, which could be done, but it steals bandwidth from the person that's hosting the file. So what we do when we load jQuery from Google, that's called a CDN. It's called a Content Delivery Network, which is becoming more and more popular with cloud computing, where we put files on a different server and we just get them from there. Because what happens is when you visit a web page that has images, it has HTML, and it has JavaScript, your browser, if all of that stuff is on the same server, it can only make so many calls at a time to your server to get each individual image or each individual JavaScript file. And by taking all the pieces and spreading them out over different computers on different servers, the browser can actually grab all of those files simultaneously, because it can make a different call to different servers at the same time. But it can't make 100 calls simultaneously to one server. So that's what people are doing to speed things up. And that's why we use the JavaScript, jQuery library from Google, because Google's been nice enough to host that for the entire world. And what happens is, when you load it there, a lot of times the jQuery library, because it's used on so many websites, it will be cached in your browser. So even though you're on 2 different websites, if they're calling the same version of the same library, you may already have it. So it makes things quicker that way too. But when it comes to using people's plugins that they've written, most of the time you have to download it, put it in your own folder, because they don't want you stealing it.
Okay.
So, yeah. Questions? Yep.
So do you recommend doing the jQuery code last, like for the matching project, or someone I did the CSS first and then at the end have the jQuery?
Yeah, no, when you're actually building a page, that's a really good way to do it.
Okay.
When you have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we refer to those as layers of a website. And you have HTML is the content layer, CSS is the presentation layer, which makes things look the way you want them to look. And then JavaScript is the interaction layer. So the easiest way to build it is to start with your HTML and get the structure right, get all your content there. Then use CSS to put everything where you want it. So if you did it that way, you would have built your matching project, you use CSS to put both images side by side, exactly where you want them, and then you follow it up by using jQuery to turn off that image and then turn it on when you click the button. So that's the best approach to take. It'll save you time and headache in the long run. So same thing here, you get everything kind of placed where you want it, styled how you want it, and then you activate the plugin to get the functionality going. So, let's see if I can get this to happen, or if I missed it already. Okay, yeah. So what you'll see is, because Cycle's so stripped down, it's taking the original HTML with all the images in it, and it's building the slideshow really quickly for you. But if it's the first time somebody visits the page, or if it's a really slow connection, what will happen is all the images would download, and then once they're downloaded, jQuery would run and launch the Cycle plugin, which would build the slideshow. So what you'll end up with is like seeing all the images on the page, and then all of a sudden like they'll shuffle up and like become one thing. So I think I fixed this here. Yeah. So let's see if I can get this to show you what I'm talking about. Yeah, see how all the images are on the page momentarily? Let me zoom out so you can see. See how all the images show up and then all of a sudden they disappear? That's because they were all loading from the HTML and then the plugin ran. So things like this will happen. This is called flout, which is a flash of unstyled content. Flout. There's different ones. There's like flout for text, because like you can do things with embedding typefaces and those show up unstyled and things like that. So basically, whenever you have an issue of unstyled content, you can handle it different ways. Some plugins are better than others, but because Cycle's so stripped down, you need to handle it on your own. So because all it's doing is taking that original div and the images in it and making it a slideshow, what you can do simply is if you take the div called gallery and you give it a height and a width, you're still seeing the images outside of it because the div will just show them anyway. But you can use the overflow property and set it to auto, or you can set it to hidden. So what that's doing is it's forcing that div to crop off the content that doesn't fit inside of it. So if we were to save this now and come back over here and reload the page, we're only seeing one image. And because my dimensions are slightly off, you see a tiny little sliver of the bottom image. And that's because we're using CSS to force that div to crop everything else so you don't see it. So these are things that you'll run into with any plugin, Cycle in particular. You just deal with it by using CSS. So there are lots and lots of plugins. You can explore them. There are lots and lots of bad plugins. So if you use another one, I'll give a quick example. We won't set it up, but things like FancyBox. And some are more complicated, like jQuery Cycle works really easily because all you do is put all the images in a div and then tell it to run on that particular div. With a plugin that does more advanced things, like FancyBox,